Although I do want to ask. Um, I think the being able to watch how we perform our job can only make us better. My question is, what were some of the barriers, or were there any barriers from your colleagues when you said that, hey, I want to record you running these kind of like high stress codes, and this is not going to be punitive?
Yeah. Paul, is a great question. And of course there were. So, and the truth of the matter is, and I can be pretty public about it, I tried to do the project when I was at the University of Pennsylvania, and they wouldn't let me do it because they were too worried that the videotapes could be used for mischief uh, and potentially some kind of uh, legal kinds of things, even though there wasn't a lot of evidence for that. When I went to Northwell, I was a little older and wiser. Okay. And so what I did is I just said, I just want to do what the trauma team does in the trauma resuscitations. And so luckily, the American College of Surgeons, they don't mess around with trauma designation. Okay. Like we might mess around a little bit and argue whether we can do this, but surgeons are like surgeons. So they videotape their trauma resuscitations all the time. Okay, and they review them. So what I said is, look, what we do with trauma, that's just what we want to do with cardiac arrest now. And I literally answered every question just like that. Like it was like literally the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. Okay. That they said, well, how long are you going to keep the tape? I said, I'm going to do just what the surgeons do. You know what I mean? Well, what are you going to do? If somebody says, I'm just going to do what those surgeons do, because look at those guys. And I totally blamed it on the surgeons, and it went right through. Okay. It just like went, the IRB approved it. It was just, everybody approved it. And then once we started getting the data, and when people realized that some of the things that we were seeing, the improvements that were happening, the way people were starting to embrace it, the cultural change that was going on, it started to sustain itself. So literally the hardest thing to do was to get it going. Obviously, it was not a difficult mental idea. Do you know what I mean? It's like everybody's got a videotape, everybody's like, that was not the hard part. But as you say, some of the making people within an institution feel comfortable with it is still a challenge. And but I just can't help but think that this kind of data is like video data is so powerful in our culture. Okay. Just think about, the recent events in the news in terms of videotaping of treatment of African Americans. Okay. I mean, videotaping is here to stay. Like it's not going to go away. So I think it's better that emergency medicine gets in front of it, learns how to deal with it in a good way, and benefits from it. So those are quick answers, Paul.
Absolutely. And just a quick follow-up. Thank you for joining us, Jessica. Are there other things that we do in emergency medicine that would be amenable to this type of recording?
Right.
Trauma and cardiac arrest are two things that lend itself very well, but should we be doing this for others?
So one of the things that we're looking at right now is putting the videotaping on the ambulance. Okay. So wouldn't it be like, just think, and what happens, I didn't describe it very well, but when you have a videotape, you just have, it's like this huge data that's coming in. Like when you, because if you think about it in a bits way, it's, you're talking two dimensions that's, changing 30 times a second. Okay. And so your ability to detect change and to do different kinds of learning off of that, we're now embarking on a little bit of a collaboration with Stanford on artificial intelligence. And they're thinking of, is there a way that we could actually pile artificial intelligence behind the videotape so that in a real way, when you're looking at some kind of an event, you can like get in front of it and not have to try to analyze it the next day or the day after. And I have no doubt that that technology will emerge. And again, what a great opportunity for emergency medicine to be on the, in the very front end of that. What an opportunity to be part of the initial uptake of that kind of both that combination of video with artificial intelligence, machine learning, like we're going to go there. And to be honest, we're going to go there, like whether or not there's some like old guys like me that say, oh, that's a little too fast for me, let's not do anything that's too much, but we're going to go there to that kind of information. And so my view is that emergency medicine should drive that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, Jessica, do you have a question?
Oh, I can come up with a million questions. Excellent presentation. Thank you. I'll follow up though on what I walked in on, and that's this idea, linked to like the police with the body cams. And at what point are we talking about record retention and a concern for liability or M&M? How are you handling that sort of ethical record retention when you have video like that?
So again, in my simple, stupid doctor role, it's like, oh, I just do what the surgeons do. Do you know what I mean? So, and really, I didn't work this out. What they do is they retain the actual video information for 28 days and it gets automatically removed at that point. So our team goes in and scores all of the data that we can snatch off of it. Okay. During that period of time. How long did it take to intubate? How long did it take for the people to come in the room? How long did it take to get the patient off the stretcher that they came in on and onto our stretcher, and then to take the Lucas device? And so one of the things that we did as part of, you read any of the papers, we tried to implement the Lucas device, and it really took I have absolutely nothing against Lucas, but when you talk to the representative, they say, oh, it takes 15 seconds to get it started. Well, guess what? Like the first time we saw it on videotape, it was 2 minutes, and they're playing around, and the drapes got, the bedding got caught in the thing, and there was all of this stuff, and we totally revamped the way we actually deal with cardiac arrest as they come into our department as a result of seeing it on the videotape. And it was our EMS people that really did that, because you could see on the videotape, they would like come in doing like CPR a little bit like this. Do you know what I mean? We call it like walking CPR, and
Elbows bent. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like, no, that's not very good CPR. And so then the group, as a group, said, what are we going to do? I said, well, look, these guys have been working this patient for a while. Somebody has to jump on that stretcher and take over CPR as soon as they start to roll in. So we changed so many of the ways in which we dealt with a cardiac arrest that I think those are the things that have really improved our survival, and our survival rates have improved.
Definitely. Alex, thank you for joining us. Do you have a question for Dr. Camargo or Dr. Becker?
I am joining mid-conversation, so I'm going to refrain from asking anything for fear of sounding ignorant. But this is great. I walked in on a great discussion, so.
Absolutely, and this is also meant to, like, if you had a question based upon the presentations themselves, or just thoughts on career mentoring, anything that you may be going through in your career that you would like some advice on, so that is open as well. Dr. Camargo.
While we're doing this, I get to ask Carlos a question. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Carlos, how did you overcome kind of the resistance of people working together when you started this? Do you know what I mean? Like, particularly back in 1996, we didn't have EMRs, we didn't have a whole lot of other things that we have now. How did you overcome that either hesitancy or barrier? What did you do to make this network come together?
Well, let's go back to 1996. What happened was I was at an SAM meeting, and there was a group of asthma researchers, about maybe 15 of us in a meeting. And people were talking about how they had just finished RCT with 100 patients, and somebody else had finished one with 60 patients, and they're all underpowered. Somebody was saying, oh, we should do a meta-analysis of all of our underpowered studies, because it was kind of a new idea, meta-analysis. And then I think there was then an emerging consensus that, well, why don't we actually all work together on shared protocols? And I had just finished, I was literally graduating from the PhD in epidemiology that month. And so people said, oh, you should run this, Carlos. And I was like, what? I was working on the nurses' health studies at the time, and physicians' health study, like 22,000 people, data for decades. And so I was very comfortable with large data sets. I worked in the emergency department, and I liked asthma. So it was kind of logical, but I remember thinking at the time, like, oh boy, what am I getting into here? But it was a very motivated group. We didn't really have any funds. We came up with a protocol that summer, and we implemented it in October. Very simple, just enroll consecutive people with asthma for 3 weeks. And then call them and find out who relapsed, who didn't, and then we can sort of learn a lot about just the care that we're providing. And this group did it. We started off, I think, with about 20 people at the meeting, and then ultimately 12 actually did it. But the 12 sites enrolled about 500, 600 patients in like a month. It was incredible. And everybody was just sort of shocked. And then we wrote a dozen papers from it. Now, back to your question, one of the things that I realized just in terms of group dynamics is nobody wants to work hard and send data to some guy at Harvard. It's not good. It's just bad optics. So I said, basically, look, I won't be a first author of any paper, and I won't take any, as we start to get funds, I'll work, I have other funding, and I'll work for free. And I said I'd do this for 5 years. So that was a pretty good strategy, because as it turned out, I was often senior author, which, as I think you all know, or that's pretty good too. But I couldn't really pursue my own individual ideas as first author. I mentored a lot of people around the country who then were very grateful for the opportunity. And anytime somebody said, oh, I don't like sending data to you, multi-center stuff, it's like I'm a cog in a wheel and you get all the credit. I'm like, well, actually, I don't. I'm not first author in any paper. I don't get paid. But if you want to join me, come on board. No takers. And then we started to get some funding, and not big funding, but we got some funding, and again, divvy it up and always give it out. And I think that was how it worked. I mean, group projects are tough, but I think
what I'm
give
seeing,
a lot of it. Go ahead.
Along those lines is what I'm seeing is, in our network, we have, I'm a toxicologist, right? So we do, the Toxicology Investigators Consortium. We've got this network. It's not as big as your asthma consortium, Carlos, but what I'm seeing now is pushback from junior and kind of mid-career investigators saying, oh, you're providing some funding for patient enrollment, but it's not enough funding. And I've run it by my chair, and yeah, we can't participate. Are there strategy, like how often do you see that? Because I'm seeing that a lot. And what are some strategies that you've used to sort of, succeed in and or work around those kind of impediments?
Yeah. So one of the other pieces, I think, that led to our ultimate success was that we also modeled the studies around the mindset of emergency medicine. What we did was, most NIH studies are 5 years. They're massive. You have to have like a lot of patients and a lot of deferred gratification. Emergency medicine people generally, they hit hard, they focus, and then it's over. And then they're bored. They want to do something else, which is wonderful, actually, as a patient. You're like the center of the universe. Oh, your chest pain is the most fascinating thing I've ever heard of. You're everything to me. I look at you, I touch you, I examine you, I treat you. Next. So what we did was we designed studies that were many sites, very short. They were so easy that it was kind of hard for people to say no. But the key was to have lots of sites. So instead of a typical, industry or NIH study that might have 5 sites that are highly trained, super sophisticated, we would have, 50 sites, but doing like a simple chart review or do some simple interviews of 10 patients at each site. So that was the strategy to get around this idea that, I don't want to commit to it. It's a burden on our department. And well, 50 sites enroll 10 patients. You got 500 patients. And can you really deny like reviewing 10 charts or talking to 10? It depends on what it is you're asking. But I think a lot of things that I've learned in my career are that a lot of the research that we end up doing is simplified. It's basic. You can make big changes in this world with very simple ideas and simple projects. I often, especially with observational studies, if you as an expert in that topic are just fascinated by it and you think it's so wonderful, it's probably too complicated. So it's almost like a rule of thumb for me is that, like, if we're doing a survey or we're doing a simple study, like some interview or chart review, if the experts that I'm working with are disappointed in how primitive and simple it is, then it's about right. Because all the people who are doing the work don't care half as much as the experts. And they'll do it because it's simple, it's fast, and then they're done. And then it turns out that the experts don't actually know what's going on across this big country and all these different emergency departments. And a lot of things we do actually don't really have an evidence base. So that's another strategy that we've utilized. And then there's a core group that we can get NIH funds from or big grants. And they keep coming back for more with subcontracts. And it's a lot more money than what you're talking about, Alex. But I think for the bigger network, these are strategies: simple, short, and then share the credit. Try to get people on the podium. I mean, I put so many people, literally hundreds and hundreds of people at podium at national meetings with free statistical support, mentorship. It's not money, but it's worth something. And then the chairs start to pay attention when they see their staff, their faculty at meetings.
Absolutely. And one other thing I would like to add on to that, or at least where I've seen that chairs have posed the question is, okay, is this something that you're passionate about? Is this your niche area that you're going to want to be known for? Then that's a reason to take the short-term loss in money. The department has to support it in order to get you where you want to go. Or is the network going to allow you to investigate your niche work because you're creating those relationships? And so if you could position it as in one of those two areas, it makes it a little bit more palatable when the department realizes that they're going to take a little bit of a loss, but it's an investment in you.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, do you have a specific?
Right.
Do you have a specific?
Yeah, those are great points. I mean, I
think
about
another way to think about it is that the simple studies, they are valuable. I mean, they teach you things like race disparities. I mean, it's not complicated, but until somebody identifies it and assesses the magnitude and where the problems are, you can't really fix it. But it's not hard stuff to do. So one of the things that I like to think about is the simple studies are the pilot work. They're easy opportunities for analysis, for credit, for sharing, and then they provide the bigger, more complicated foundation, federal government grants that then go to a smaller set of people who are more prepared, they're more committed, they're willing to work for 5 years. And so you have this sort of different levels of engagement. And together it works. You can't do everything for everyone, the same. Just one size fits all does not fit most.
Yeah, no, I think I find it easier to convince junior investigators, and harder to convince chairs that their department needs to participate. And because the stonewalling that I get is with indirect funds. They'll say, well, there's not enough indirect funds to do this. There's not enough time dedicated, blah, blah, blah. So they'll put up that wall, and then we're kind of dead in the water. If it's a simple study, I think, yeah, employing some of those strategies that you're talking about, keeping it simple, keeping it short, providing mentorship, providing statistical expertise and backup. Those are great comments and things that.
Yeah, and toxicology. Think about, there's so many things you can look at in toxicology that really don't have good evidence base. So somebody, I want to study this super complicated. Just do a simple study. Have 50 sites. And then out of those 50 sites, maybe you'll invite 4 to be part of a NIH grant.
Absolutely. I believe, thank you for that. That was very good. Jessica had a question about Dr. Camargo's work.
Hi again, Carlos.
Hey.
Great to see you here. Excellent talk.
Thank you.
When I'm watching your talk about the microbiome, and it brought up a few questions. I'd like to know more about the collection sites, but what it brought to mind were 2 things. One was the 2015 child study. So this was a birth cohort. They were looking to develop asthma in Canada. In the first 100 days, the dysbiosis in the gut predicted asthma. So, as you're looking at what is the microbiome, what is the viral load, what is the evidence of bacteria, that came to mind of, are we looking in the gut because there's already evidence of very early life right after birth? And then the other thing came to mind too is actually some work in older adults with COPD, in that their exacerbations weren't necessarily linked to what the bacteria was, but if it was the first time they were colonized with that bacteria. And so how might that enter into some of the work that you're doing with these omics?
Yeah, so I mean, you raise a lot of issues. We are collecting fecal specimens, fecal samples from kids, but not in the emergency department or in the ICU often, right? It's
as a nurse, thank you.
Yeah, so again, our research has to also be sensitive to the environment. People can't, defecate on command, and so we often collect it afterwards, and that needs funding. Parents, people don't want to participate unless they get paid, or it's unpleasant. So without going into more details, we do have that information, but it's less relevant to the acute side of the story that I told you, because we don't have the stool specimen 1 week before they crashed. We usually have the stool specimen after they recovered. So there's another part of this universe that says Carlos is an asthma researcher. He studies the causes of asthma, and then they love this data. But this universe that we're in right now, they like severe bronchiolitis and intubation and crashing, and it's very hard to collect some specimens in that environment. And so we focused, and I presented more about the airway and about all the stuff we're doing with nasal samples in the middle of the crisis, in the battle, because it's just hard to go back in time. So anyway, hopefully but I think you raised very interesting points, and we're aware of them. But again, we're working in these 2 worlds. One is acute, one is chronic. And Alex isn't on the call, but one of the things I've learned, and I'm sure Lance is going to agree, is that the NIH is interested in certain kinds of research, and emergency physicians often are interested in another kind of research. And they're both very important, but you can't force the NIH to like your ideas in emergency medicine. It doesn't work that way. So often you'll have 2 different worlds of research, and one will subsidize the other. And so
Mhm.
throughout my career, I've done kind of the research that you're alluding to, right? And that subsidizes my emergency research to some extent.
I think that's a brilliant, just to follow on, and I don't want to crowd out space for other questions, but what a key opportunity for interdisciplinary leadership to really look among nursing. If I was to study oncology, or if I was an oncology nurse, the infrastructure and the pathway for, post PhD, all kinds of research is just laid before me with a golden road. But we know on the population level that you struggle with that kind of infrastructure to do emergency related research. And yet what an impact that has on a broad level of causes of mortality and morbidity. And so, if there are ways to join forces to sort of raise those voices, not that I want to cut the pie different, but we need a bigger pie where we also have those pathways and that infrastructure and that interest. And I really appreciate what Jeremy Brown is doing at NIH, but we need to keep really, I think, exponentially growing this so that when we have on our end, whether it's MD, PhDs or clinician scientists of any educational preparation, to not have to feel like you have to focus on a particular disease process that's got the biggest funding at NIH to be successful.
Yeah, I've never found that I've never felt compromised by the dilemma. It's almost more about how creative can you be to get what you want and make more people happy. I mean, but that's mentorship. I mean, I didn't figure it out all by myself. I mean, I have good mentors, and they say, well, what about this? And you're like, oh yeah, that might work. And asthma turns out to be a really good one because it has an acute crisis, but it also has this chronic population dimension. It has race disparities. It has, you can kind of spin it whichever way you want, depending on your audience. And it's all interesting to me. I'm happy. I'm a researcher. You just put some ideas in front of me. Eventually I'll get interested. And, oh yeah, I like toxicology too. I listen to Lance's talk. I'm like, oh, I got some ideas, So I don't know. I think it's very important to be flexible. And I think if you really are loving your research, you're going to be fine. It might not be exactly what you want when you want it, but you'll get there eventually. Lance, I'm curious. I'm talking too much. What do you think about all this?
No, I mean, look, I completely agree. You got to, I think the most important thing is part of what Carlos has done that's so impressive is there's been sort of a balance of I'll say sort of low level funding with bigger funding. And I think that that's like something that in emergency medicine, you have to get nimble at. Okay. That there are things that I do, and the Alex sort of mentioned, like there are things that are completely unfunded, but I just expect that is the state of the world. Okay, that there are going to be particularly beginning things that you're going to do that are unfunded, and you're going to build those into things that you can then strategically fund, as Carlos is talking, and put a real team around it, gain expertise, get depth, and make it competitive, which is difficult to do. And I also think there's opportunities for stuff in getting industry support. I mean, getting philanthropy support. I believe. Look, I'm a department chair. I mean, I believe like you look under every rock, okay? And if it's a good question, Jessica, if you're asking a good question, a lot of times you can find a way to do it. And I will say this is going to sound probably completely anathema. I see Will's on from the University of Chicago, but I will say that the lack of funding is not really what holds us back from doing so many things. Like, yeah, I could complain about it all day long. And I, have very publicly complained about it, writing papers about the lack of funding, but that's not really what holds us back. Okay. And I would say that for me, I don't know if Carlos agrees, like the ultimate luxury of being a professor, if you will, being on the academic track, is it unlike virtually any other career that I know of, like we all have the opportunity, like if I want to study something with Carlos, I can start tomorrow. Okay. If I want to do something with Paul, I can start tomorrow. With Will, we're starting a collaboration that we just talked about. Like we started it, you know, and there are so few jobs that you get where they pay you, you know, like a salary. Okay. Where you really get to do whatever you want to do. And so what I would say is money is not really what holds most projects back.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, one of the sort of stranger advice that I give a generation of researchers is, you know, they finish their EM residency and they emerge and they're like, oh, how do I get a grant? I said, well, why don't you start off by working 50%? And they're like, what? And they're like, that's a lot of money. And I said, well, how much money do you need? Do you want to be a researcher? You need time. Buy it. And, you know, obviously there's some people who are huge debts, but that's often not what happens. And it's not the debt that keeps you in the clinic. It's the fact that that's what everyone does, and it's a lot of money, and it's kind of good for the household finances. But it's very hard to get an NIH grant unless you commit all that time. And so emergency physician salaries are pretty high. So anyway, but I've had many, you know, half dozen people at least who've done this and who've gotten federal funding. And I'm confident they would not have gotten it unless they had spent all that time doing the pilot work, writing all the papers, resubmitting. And so there's a point where you're losing money to get the funding success that makes a career. And I would say to them, look, and if you don't do as many shifts, you have more time to work out, more time with your family. I mean, there's so many advantages. Just stop making money. So, you know, like for the sake of, I know I could make more. Guess what? You also moonlight more, and then you could, you know, work 80 hours a week and collapse rich. So it's a funny argument to make. You can't make it with everyone. Obviously, a resident would never want to hear this because they're not making much. But I think the faculty, they kind of are, and they need time. That's the biggest barrier. Like, I don't have the time to write the paper. I don't have the time to go through 5 drafts. I don't have the time to read the literature. I don't have the time. Create the time.
Yeah, completely agree with that. We have researchers at our institution that says, well, I need more time. And I have to look and say, well, what did you do with the time that you already have? It looked like you went out and did some more moonlighting.
It's like, not good. Now, you know, some people have debt, but again, everyone says, oh, I got debt. It's like, well, you have debt for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Will, Irma, David.
To me, the amount of research you can do on a really small amount of money, okay, if you put the time into it, as Carlos was talking about. So when I said, you know, like we do sort of crazy things all the time, you know, we started this program with videotaping cardiac arrest. Like we started that for like almost zero money. Like the amount of money that I put into it to, like, what did we have to buy? You know, like a camera, you know what I'm saying? It was like, really, like that's the investment that would prevent you from generating really good data, you know, $59. I mean,
and Lance, you would agree that, I mean, I totally agree with that. I think it's a great project. You learn so much, you prove so much, that you're probably helping mortality of people. I mean, would the NIH fund this?
probably not.
No.
Probably not.
So you just don't even try. Like, go to the NIH and argue, oh, this is good for America. Well, you could, but guess what that takes?
I'm gonna put a challenge on this,
Time.
and that so T32's support time, and as a discipline and as a specialty, I would love to see more emergency nursing, emergency physician T32s. And I agree with what you're saying, that resonates in my own career, but I'm mentoring people from very diverse, often low income backgrounds. And that creates a disparity and a barrier to getting started in the emergency specialty. This idea of time and work less, where my mentees, this is not feasible.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's other specialties, again, with these really well-refined T32s. I challenge us to raise our voices together and get more of those going.
Yeah,
I
my
think
comments were very specific to a class of people called emergency physicians, who are paid well and have many hours in that 168-hour week that we all share. And I asked people, they said, I don't have enough time. It's like, how many shifts did you do? Let's subtract that from 168. Now let's subtract the sleep you need. And now let's subtract the time to eat. And now there's always this chunk of time. That is not true for somebody who's making very little money, has huge debt. You know, they might have to have 2 jobs, et cetera. And so I understand, Jessica, what you're saying. I agree with you. But again, for emergency physicians, if you like research, do research. Don't moonlight more shifts, like Paul said. And I've seen that. I've called people on that.
Will, Irma, David, do you guys have any thoughts, comments, questions?
Yeah, I guess I have one. So forming these research networks, you know, I know, and like Lance, you know, and you know, there's Siren, which is national, but you know, there are these local, there are sort of these regional cardiac arrest networks that people have formed, right? They, you know, there's like Pittsburgh, and then they collaborate with someone with Alabama, and so there's like a network. And so one of the things I'm trying to think of is, no matter what the research question is, as an investigator, how do you end up joining one of these and deciding which group you want to try to join? You know, and that's something I'm just going to start trying to reach out to at U of Chicago, because I'm getting 1.5 cardiac arrests a day. So, I mean, and just, you know, we have so many cardiac arrests here. And so we have this huge database, and trying to figure out, like, you know, we can publish things, but would be a single site. So trying to like network with people would be a really great strategy. Any advice on how to do that type of thing?
I agree. And I think, you know, I hate to say it, but sometimes you date them before you marry them, if you know what I mean, by which I mean, you know, try some collaborations out. I mean, you know, and you get a sense pretty early on as to whether or not it's worthwhile. Do you feel respected in the sort of way it's being set up? Does it have a good governance kind of system to it, that where if you have young people, they're not gonna, you know, that they'll get some credit for it, they'll learn something from it. And if you try a few things out, you'll pretty quickly figure it out. And, you know, and I mean, a simple way to do it is you just ask yourself, are you having fun working with this group? Okay. Or is this one of these groups that at the end of the call, you're like, this was not so much fun. Okay. Because you'll get that group too. And I'm pretty, you know, like I try it out, and you know, as you know, I have enormous collaborations all over the world. And so I do think that but I think it's also partly, Will, part of what you're saying is, look, this would be a good thing to advance some of the work that I'm doing. And I mean, you know, you've got amazing people at the University of Chicago who can help you with some pieces of it. And I think the one thing is, you should not feel like you have to do every piece of it yourself, you know, like you find a good trial list, you know, you have to get some people interested in that. You find a good biostatistician, some things like that, so that you can really bring something to the party. But I think collaborating is a great way to also get the program going. So we are actively in discussions about joining one of the networks that's a little bit bigger. So I have the luxury that we're large enough that we can be our own network. Okay. And so it's 19 emergency departments. But even so, I still think it's valuable to be in larger networks so that you can put more data together, and we're investigating that right now.
Yeah, I think, Will, I
Sorry.
think that you might want to, make a list of your candidates. You're looking at them and asking yourself, who should I approach? Then if I were in your shoes, I would look at publications by that group. That's very important, and how the credit is distributed. The other thing, so spend time on PubMed with the leaders, looking up the leadership of those organizations that you're investigating. And then the other one is Reporter, the NIH Reporter. Look at the funding, and look at the funding for the last few years, and look at the trajectory. I mean, did they have one good idea and then it's over? Or is there a track record of ideas? And then the last thing is, it shouldn't stop you from writing up your single center experience. I mean, there's plenty of very good single center work that it's nice, it's controlled, it's one center. It's not like this one sliver of only, red hair people can come in. I mean, you got everybody. Chicago, good grief. You got all kinds of different people. You can split them up in different ways. They got treated differently on different shifts. So use that data. And I think if you do that well, then these people you're investigating look at you and say, oh, we want Chicago in ours because they do good stuff. In the meantime, you've figured out who are the ones who share credit, who respect each other, who are open to new ideas, and who have, promise, rather than kind of one big grant and then collapse. Because you don't want to, that happens all the time. Networks start and then they sort of collapse. You don't want to be arriving to the party as it's closing. So some thoughts.
Thank you. That's great.
Hi,
Come on,
I'm
yeah.
Irma. I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician in Houston. And I had a question regarding sort of the need for a master's in clinical research or epidemiology. Do you think that's really key? I did fellowship after residency, but certainly I don't have a master's. I've taken some courses through our university, through the Texas Medical Center, but it seems to me like, well, first, I think there's it's sort of a two-pronged question, because I think mentorship is a big issue. And I'm having sort of kind of, I don't think I have all the right mentorship. I'm looking for mentors in pediatric injury, and I don't have them all. It's sort of hard, I feel, to really have a mentor to kind of sort of help you a bit. And then the importance of a master's. What are your thoughts on that? To sort of take research to the next level and kind of start doing grants and that kind of thing. I've done basically mostly unfunded research through our trauma registry, but also I'm on some grants, but that I haven't written. So I'm on the PCARN grant for validation study, but I didn't write that. I'm just the PI for our center. And so sort of taking research to the next level, do you think, how important is a master's, for instance?
Lance, you want me to talk?
I think I'll just give you my bias. And remember, I spent 10 years at the University of Pennsylvania. My lab was in the CHOP space. So I know I know PCARN network pretty well. Okay. And there are a lot of ways that, as you've already got your foot in that, you can now use that to leverage yourself up. Okay. So that's one thing, is to use that network for sure. Okay. But the second thing is, what about a formal degree? I think the advantage of the formal degree is when you need the time and the mentorship to do something that you haven't been able to put together in your current environment. So it sort of changes the pace for you a little bit. And so I think that would be very good if you're serious about doing this, because it does two things. One, that Carlos is one way or another, you have to now put serious time into your research. Okay. And the second thing is, it now provides another network of people within that program that are also now invested in you doing great stuff. Okay. Because they've got to get you a master's degree thesis or whatever kind of thing you're going to do as part of it. You take some courses. And so to me, the reason to do a master's degree, I don't think it's what you get from the didactics that will really like grow your brain more than it is. Okay. But I do think that what you may get something from that environment that you don't currently have in your environment right now. The, you know, a more, you know, tough question is like, well, why not just do a fellowship? Okay. Like, why not take a year and get into one of the great, PCARN offers a fellowship, you know, get into the fellowship where you have both protected time and mentors, and there's projects that you can like get attached to, you know, or do a research fellowship for a year where you do that. I do think it takes that sort of commitment, and whether you get a master's degree or not is kind of that's up to, you know, kind of what your particular situation. But you know, we do a thing where we have a research fellowship that's an unfunded kind of research fellowship that emergency medicine people do. But if they do 2 years of that, we get them a master's degree as part of it. Okay. But that's also they're working 50% time so that they can still earn, you know, $125,000 a year while they do a fellowship. But they have 50% time, as Carlos said, now they have 50% time to invest in their career. And the people who do that for 2 years come out and they're like publishing great stuff, and they're starting to write a K award, and they're starting to do the kinds of things that are going to advance their career. You know, you don't have to tell me like how many clinical hours you have, but I bet it's a little bit more than I would recommend for someone who is trying to really get their career started. So maybe thinking of it that way. Okay, I talked too much. Carlos, what do you?
No, I agree. And I think you hit on a variation of my earlier theme, which was you want to be a serious researcher and you want funding, you need to get time. I mean, time is the thing that ultimately we all want, and we can only have it by giving up something else. And I think the luxury of an emergency physician lifestyle is that you get paid so well for those hours in that emergency department that you can potentially give up some of them to get time. And now if you could do it in a new environment where there's new, fresh faces and they're all talking about statistics and epidemiology, and which are things that you're not going to get on a shift in the pediatric ED. It's going to change the way you think about research. And I don't think the master's itself is valuable, but I do think the knowledge you get, you may take a night class here, there, kind of learn it a little bit. If you commit yourself to learning it for several months, you're going to learn it at a different level. And trust me, when you finish your master's, you're not going to believe how little you knew. If it's a good master's program, you will leave thinking to yourself, God, I was really dumb then, and now I'm just kind of dumb, because you'll be saying, there's so much more to learn. I didn't even know that these people did all these things, but now I know. And that's fine. At some point, you don't have to be a cardiac surgeon to take care of cardiac emergencies. You say, that's fine, you do that, but I know what you do. So the statistician, I don't have to do all this fancy statistics, but I kind of know how to talk with you, and I know how to get a consult, and I know the limits of my knowledge. And so to me, higher education, master's, PhD, it's more about knowing the limits of your knowledge when you get a consult, when you don't. But right now, trust me, you do the master's, we'll talk. I guarantee you're going to say, I cannot believe I was writing papers and I didn't really know what a confidence interval was, or I didn't really know how to analyze categorical data or survival data. And you can kind of fake it and put it into the program and a p-value comes out, but you don't really know what it means. And then it sort of becomes a little dangerous, because people emerging from master's programs are some of the most toxic people in emergency medicine. They're just going around in journal clubs, blowing up everything, insulting everyone, because they've kind of realized that they know things they didn't know before, and everyone around them doesn't know them either. So anyway, we'll get there when you get there, but a lot of good work can be done without a master's. But if you're serious about research, you need that knowledge base, you need the time, you need new mentors. And looking for one mentor, I mean, that's old fashioned, it's gone. You gotta get several mentors. You need a mentor, you know, maybe 5, I don't know, but you need a mentor who's kind of a methodologist. You need a mentor who's a clinician. You need a mentor who's got like a normal, healthy lifestyle. You need a mentor who's, you know, like all these people are giving you input, and you don't have to do everything everyone says because there'll be contradictory advice sometimes, but you'll have choices instead of just being on this railroad track, you know, just like, well, I got to do another shift, make more money. You know, I got to buy a bigger house. You know.
I had another question, sorry, but there's so I came, you know, I've been sort of doing a lot of like, and talking to my former, you know, chiefs from fellowship, like, do I do a fellowship? Do I do something more training, right? I mean, I would go to school for the rest of my life if I could probably, but that's probably not, you know, the best practice either. But I came across this program through Columbia where they have, it's basically it's like a summer institute, and it's this, I wish I could share it with you, but it's an 8-week program now because it's virtual, and it basically has like some networking and some coursework. It's like pretty intense. And you don't get a certificate, but it's like a postdoc of some sort. And it seems like people who graduated from that program this year, it's 8 weeks virtual. It's like all afternoons, you know, Monday through Friday. Before pandemic, it was 5 weeks in person all day long at Columbia. But it looks really, really good. It's $20,000 though.
Yeah. No,
Right,
we run a program like that at Harvard.
Okay.
And it's called the Clinical Effectiveness Program.
Okay.
And it's just, I mean, every serious clinical researcher in the Harvard system has that kind of training from somewhere. It's a rare, they may not have a master's after their name, but they know the difference between a case control study and an RCT. They know the advantages of an RCT. They just know so much that it's like they're working at a different level. That's the level you need to be at to get grants. And you need grants to hire help, and you need help
exactly.
so that you can go home and you can go work out. You can be normal and happy.
Yeah.
You don't want to be a 60-year-old EM researcher like working all weekend, you know.
But how do you negotiate that? Like, so I actually brought this program up to my chief because I think it would be amazing, and it seems like the trajectory of people who've taken that program has been really good. I mean, it really sort of helps you grant writing. There's people who really process, and so it seems like it really launches you in a very positive direction. And so how do you, but that would require time, whether I pay for it or my institution pays for it, but it would also require 8 weeks of, although it's virtual, I'd have to be limited with shifts, right? So how do you negotiate that? Given that it's not like, I'm getting paid, right?
Let me try it with one of the chair who's on this call, named Dr. Becker. So I would say to Dr. Becker, hey, Lance, I'm really committed to research. I've been doing these projects for the last few years. I try to publish a few papers every year, but I really need to take it to the next level. So I want to commit myself this summer to taking this course. It's going to mean I do less shifts. I'm happy to do the shifts at other times over the next year. Can we be flexible here and work that out?
And the answer is absolutely. And we negotiate this all the time. You don't understand. This is like the number one thing that I negotiate with faculty, like numero uno.
But Lance, let's talk about the things that I said to you that you said, yes. Yeah.
So the things
commitment.
Is it, if you're going to say, look, I'll pay, I need a break here, but I'm going to pay you back shifts later. Okay. That's going to be revenue neutral. Okay. All I have to do is do a little smoothing, which as a chair, mostly I can do that. Okay. You could be in a really small place where they can't do that, but places that have sufficient faculty can typically do that. Okay. And 2 months is not a really big deal to flex. Okay, yeah, there'll be some commitment. But I'm also going to say, well, but you know, what are your individual milestones going to be? Because if I'm going to make this, you know, because maybe I'm willing to pay for part of this. Okay, and we do. Okay, and I have funding that I can flex sometimes to help someone with a program like this, and we've certainly done that in the past. That you just, I'm just saying, like, you know, we do this, and most chairs. My guess is you're at UT Houston, is that right? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
UT
McGovern.
plenty of money to be able to do stuff. Isn't that where is that
Ben
who's it?
Gilbrow just came on a couple of years ago after Jimmy McCarthy left.
Yeah, Jamie, just to go bother Jamie. Jamie was one of my residents in Chicago.
Oh, how funny. Well, no, Jamie McCarthy is now, he's been promoted to like,
Yeah, he told me that he's like God Almighty now. So
he's
it's
chief, yeah,
So I think the point,
position
Irma,
officer.
Irma, the point is that you have goals, you have
Mhm.
career needs, et cetera. Think about the department too.
Yeah.
The department has needs and goals too. So in addition to like saying, this is gonna be so great for me, you know, also say, not only will I not make it a hit for the department by making up my shifts later, but then I will also play a bigger role within PCARN. For instance, I've talked to the PCARN people, and there's an opportunity for me to write a grant, and it'll be based at our institution. This kind of knowledge will allow me to give lectures to the residents or to the fellows to advance the research of other people in our team. In other words, make it like a good deal for the department.
Right, yeah.
It's not like they're going to necessarily, oh, we'll pay for the whole thing, you know, Merry Christmas. But at least they're going to say, well, it's a lot, it's a lot of good stuff for us, you know, sure.
I believe your chair will take it very seriously if you give them a serious proposal that you thought through. So the way to do it is to think of it as a proposal. Okay. And I call them individual development plans. Okay. But like what I want from my faculty is I want them to have an individual development plan. And I torture my people with this, particularly in the first year or two, because they have to come, they have to talk to me. And so I said, okay, good. Why don't you show me your individual development plan? And when I started it at Northwell, they're like, what is that? You know? And so these are things that you develop on your own. You talk to people. And if you really want to sell me, you say, well, look, I talked to so-and-so and so-and-so, and they show this is a really valuable, great investment of funding because this program is the best one in the country for getting me to this goal that I want to get to. So the program is really a high value program. The kinds of deliverables that I would expect would be to be able to deliver this and this and this from it. Kind of collaborations will build. The department needs to develop more research. I'm making this up. We don't have a ton of mentors within our department. So I'll be able to mentor young people in a couple of years from this. I mean, you know, you got to sell it a little bit, but you should make it about the department.
Right.
And you know, if you're willing to, I'll say, shift your time around a little bit, most chairs don't have a big problem with that.
Yeah, and I think, Irma, a key part of the pitch is going to be like, remember when you applied to grad school and stuff, you know, you might have said, oh, I want to be a hematologist or something, you know, and then you told this whole story about how your research was related to this and it all kind of fits together. You need that story. People like stories. And so if you have a story that says you want to do pediatric emergency care trauma research, tell us where you'll be 5 years from now. Tell that story. If it turns out in the middle of it, you become interested in endocrine disease, well, it flips to something else, but the basic storyline will not be different and it will be attractive to your department.
And I will say this, remember, there's the K-12 program nationally that you could like talk to the PIs for the K-12 program. That's like, that is like, you can get a master's degree out of that. It's 2 years of support.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. It was great. I did one of those programs. Definitely. I believe we are at time. We got the 1 minute warning about 2 minutes ago. This was great. This is, I mean, it's like, even for just for me sitting here, hearing you all talk about these things, it's such great mentorship. And so I appreciate it. I apologize for anyone that didn't get to ask a question that that they wanted to have asked. But I'm sure that our presenters would be happy to talk with you offline to share some of their wisdom. Any closing remarks from anybody?
Both Carlos and I are pretty easy to find on the internet. Okay?
Carlos at Harvard.
Yeah.
I literally have told people that, and they're like, write to me.
Lance.becker@northwell.edu. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not that hard. Like, people find me from all over the world who I really probably wish they didn't, but no, we are always available to our brethren from emergency medicine.
Absolutely. And great questions. You really are hitting
Absolutely.
on the basic, things that matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And Irma,
wonderful.
The one thing I would like to say that I did my K-12 and my master's, that my biggest grant that I've gotten so far came out of the collaborations I made with people that I did my master's program, and actually including one of my instructors, that we just hit it off so well, and we got a PCORI award together. So that master's program training was very good.
That's why the program is so valuable. It's not really your book learning, it's the whole thing.
The network. Yeah.
Mhm.
Network you build. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Thank everyone for joining. All right, bye-bye.